be good
Here,
enough.
look. Will you be able to see that?
Nope.
Oh. Okay.
I can see like this.
So you're just gonna have to put something underneath it. Here.
I can just grab that camera.
Like that. Well, what about like right in front of me?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can
This
do it
is
right.
Oh, it's not actually, it's a photo camera.
What about right here? Right
I'll leave it. Sure.
Or you
It
can,
has to be like straightish.
you can stick something in there. Good, I got you.
Oh, it's not in a cup yet.
Just make it straight again. Just stick this cup in there. Something like that.
We found the engineer. I did engineering too, technically.
So I used to go for, if you just stick it in
You can look.
I was just trying to make sure this is appropriate.
You want to?
Are you flattening my cup?
there. Did you need it?
No,
I had it for its width. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it back.
No, there's gonna be 2 people here, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't need to get me in there.
Are they gonna be 2 people or 1?
No, we can
Just
just
one.
scoot back.
This will be one. She'll be
Walk
doing
into-
this.
Hmm?
She'll be the
one.
one doing
Just
it.
one.
Okay.
She's the only one speaking.
Yeah.
Let's
As long
do
as it
this.
is.
Yeah, place more.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah. Close, let's mess with the knob real quick. Keep going.
There we go.
Is it gone, young guys? Okay, there we go.
Alright guys, if this falls, take care of it.
No, let's put actual physical things instead of that. With us. Let's put actual remotes and things down there.
And has it started the live session? Live session?
Yeah, the live session started.
Has it?
You started that one?
Hmm?
It's live.
Yeah, it's live.
Okay.
Do you want to move over more to that?
So you don't want the cup.
Oh, that's fine. If it, the thing is, I don't think it's gonna maintain its integrity for that long.
Okay, I'm not a structural engineer, but I'm pretty close.
Let's get that. Yeah, get that bottom. Sorry for the technical difficulty, guys. We're trying to stream to like I don't know how many people are watching the stream, but there you go. That's a bit more. Put the paper thing there too, just for for some added support.
Safety factor.
Safety feature. Yeah.
There you go.
That's the one that they recall
Alright.
in the company.
Can you-
They're like,
can you do like your hand
That's
gestures?
what happened. They put that one in there too.
Hey, can you do like a hand gesture or
Roll
something?
me over there somehow.
I want to see if it'll go off screen.
It's gonna be tough. Abdullah and Fatima, if I could just roll by you real quick. Just watch it for you guys. I am so
you're the
sorry.
MC.
I'm just honoring you, remember.
Excellent. Actually, no, that's not excellent. Yeah, I'm gonna need you to your side of your hijabs will be shown. So when you turn this way, I need to look at the camera.
You flip the camera?
No, I just need to look at the camera. Look me up. Yeah. Okay. So could you position how you'd be talking? How would you be sitting? Like that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. But just make sure. That's fine. That's fine.
She can scoot in a little bit.
Yeah, if you just make sure when you're talking, to be also looking on the side as well, if you can.
Okay, I'm just really trying to set up.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, that's good, man.
If you can just set up that on my iPad, I'll do it. I'll send it for you.
But I don't think you know.
Very good.
Just show me the email I need to send it to and the links. That's all I need to open up here.
By the way, he's always been like this.
Yeah, I'm trying to get.
Huh? What? Huh? Yeah, you could have warned her 5 years ago. I tell you, he's like,
He's been online since like Maine and everything. So.
In the meantime, you guys, can you roll me around to everybody else? Any questions right now? Feel free to ask any questions and
Okay, I
stuff.
got it. And I'm sending it.
We're good, right? This
She's still
angle's-
sending it. Don't worry about that. You guys have any questions around this? Go for it.
So you know how you said like you should seek counsel?
Yes.
But then like if you have like a private issue and
Mhm.
you're supposed to be like a garment to your significant other,
Beautiful question.
how do you like not compromise their like
That's an excellent question because a lot of times also we have the hadith of covering up the sins of someone else, right? Not just their problems, but their sins. So where does that boundary lie, right? So what's very interesting is when it comes to having marital issues, right? We do that, we do garment as well, but at the same time, when we're trying to seek advice, we're not trying to go and bash that individual. Now, there's ways of going about it, right? If you go to, for example, your friend and be like, you know what my husband did today? Okay, well, you know you're not coming in there to be a garment and do anything, right? You're coming over there to basically, like, just vent, right? To be honest, right? And can you just turn me a bit that way over? I'm like my positioning man is like, be so comfortable here. But thank you for doing it. I appreciate it.
Brother on the floor, so I
That's
don't
too
fuck
funny.
them.
So, but when you go to someone and say, okay, you know what, I wanted to talk to you about something, it's all about how you approach it, right? But at the same time, you have to be smart and intelligent enough to understand that if we are talking to the wrong people and this information gets out, that's problematic, right? We shouldn't be going to the wrong people. And even my personal advice is do not go to your parents regularly for marital advice. Let me tell you why. Because when you go, you're not telling them about the good stuff. You're telling them about the bad stuff. And what do you say to them? Well, you know what she did today? This is what you did yesterday. Same thing with the husband, did this. Now when your parents see your spouse and they see, got him married to the wrong person. She's suffering because of this fool. He's suffering because of this woman,
Yes,
right?
feelings are important.
If you can go over there.
And your gut.
Is that you or? How the audio?
I
Maybe.
think that was from the laptop.
Yeah, that was just Sadia's
Okay.
live stream. Okay, I'm ready.
Good. Can you please just set this up for me so I can keep on emailing?
Okay,
them
but it's just a
so-
live, it's continuing the same
No, but
stream.
those people who will keep purchasing it, adding on, we have to
Okay.
keep sending it to them. So if you can just set that up for me on this, that I can be able to.
We can do it at the next session. There was
Okay,
no,
that's
there
fine,
was
that's
no.
fine. All right, so,
Okay.
good question, but what my end point is that it really goes back to intention, that there's a time when we have to go to be able to seek counsel to get help. We don't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to suffer in our marriages. That's why divorce is there. But we're not supposed to suffer. Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu alaykum anfusakum. Translation, those who believe, take care of yourselves in your iman, in your spirituality, in your relationships. If you're not taking care of them, who's going to take care of them? Nobody else magically is going to come outside and change your marriage and fix the situation. We have to be able to step up. The Prophet of Allah went to people for advice. So we got to look at the Prophet's example and be like, let me go get some advice. Let me go to a professional.
No.
With that, I'm out of here.
No.
I'll see you guys in a bit. Assalamu alaikum. Oh, why is it on me?
Well, because you were speaking for a second.
Stop. Okay, good. I can take that?
Okay. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Okay, sorry about that. Now we're going to be live streaming the rest of the day and we shouldn't be changing any of the settings, so it should be set. So how are you guys doing? Good, alhamdulillah. Today's topic is... sure. Or not. I don't think we're okay with people still coming in. So today's topic is beyond roles and responsibilities. What is marriage in the eyes of Allah? How does Allah describe marriage in the Quran, and what does He say? So we're actually going to talk about roles and responsibilities, but we're also going to talk about marriage from the perspective of what Allah wants us to know. So one of the most oft repeated ayahs in the Quran for every single marriage, for every single nikah, is this ayah in Surah Ar-Rum, ayah 21. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when talking about the signs of creation is one sign amongst many signs, which is that He created for you from yourselves mates so that you may find tranquility in them. And so we eventually, there we go, Allah's given us the objective. The objective of marriage is so that you find tranquility in this person. There is some sakina. The word there right here, taskunu, comes from the same root letters as sakina, tranquility. Coming home and feeling comfort. Coming home and seeing the coolness of your eyes. Your family being that for you, your spouse, as well as your children. And that's not to say that life's not going to be difficult. It is. But this is the goal and the objective. And then Allah mentions right after that yeah, it is going to be difficult. And that's what the next ayah says. And He placed between you love. That's expected. We were hoping for that. But He also says, and we placed between you mercy. What does mercy mean? Mercy has many connotations, but mercy can also have a negative connotation, right? Meaning someone is doing something wrong, and therefore you have to be merciful to them. So Allah is telling us from the get-go, the objective of marriage is sakina, tranquility in this relationship. But within this relationship, there's going to be a lot of love, and there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to have to be forgiving and merciful, and looking at their shortcomings and saying, it's okay, I see that there is something greater than this. I see that there are so many other foundations that our marriage is built upon, so I will forgive you in this. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us immediately that it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be just a cinch. Now, a lot of times, and you're the married crowd, so you guys know that. Everyone who's been married realizes that those rose-colored lenses have been taken off, which we were told our entire lives, as the Disney movies say, happily ever after. Like, as soon as Cinderella gets married, it's happily ever after, right? And we're all like, yeah, wait till day 3 of marriage, and you'll see there's going to need to be a lot of mercy. But because we don't talk about it enough, and because we don't see it enough on the media, we just, a lot of people are confused and assume that there is this Jannah on earth when you get married. This is now Jannah, this is paradise, cloud 9. But Allah says and warns us that there's going to be need and time for mercy. Now, some of you guys may have gone through, this is a combination of the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put forth for us, the wisdom of the divine, with the statistics of the counselors and the psychological, the relationship psychologists. And they say that you could break your marriage up into 3 possible phases, if you were to maybe look chronologically. You have that first intense love, which is natural, which is good, which is how we as a species continue to exist, is that man, woman are attracted to one another. There's this infatuation phase. There's this extreme love phase. Even if after you get married, there's this honeymoon phase. And then, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala follows it up with, is the mercy phase. And this is actually statistically the first, after the honeymoon period is over, whether it took few days, months, weeks, or whatever it may have taken, that period where your rose-colored, the rose-tinted glasses are still there as the honeymoon phase. As soon as they've been taken off is what begins the conflict phase, which is said statistically to be about the first 2 years of marriage. So knowing for those couples who are newly married, or they know someone newly married, if you're in that first 2 years and things are not as easy as everyone said, now you know, hey, it's okay. That's what the statistics showed. It's going to be obvious that in the first 2 years, 2 completely different people are not going to be able to harmonize immediately. It's going to take time to eventually figure out, well, when she does this, I will do that. And when he does this thing I don't like, I will do that. And you come to conclusions of what creates that sakina. So we're on a pathway towards sakina, but it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes pain, right? We know that for anything we do, whether it's working out or whether it's studying, it requires some pain for us to be able to see that gain. So that conflict phase, whether it's short or long, it exists, and it can be a very devastating time for a couple who expected, all of this abundance of love. But we have to ground ourselves in reality. Allah mentions it, and the psychologists mention it, so it's something we have to be prepared for. Then finally, what we're working towards, and that doesn't mean that now everything just goes up, What we're working towards continuously is that path to tranquility. We've gone through the infatuation phase. We've hopefully gotten through the big crux of the conflict phase, and then what we have continuing is waves of up and down. Waves of up and down. It's not just sakina the rest of the time. Because if it's a goal, goals always need to continuously be worked towards. One thing that is mentioned by an author, a counselor, he mentions that oftentimes our expectation of marriage, coming into marriage, or even in our marriage itself, we have this expectation of marriage, which is like, if we were to say there was my image of marriage and what, a metaphor of it, it would be like this an entire garden full of blooming flowers. That's our image. That's marriage. And we can all remember that feeling before we got married, that when I thought about marriage, it was just this garden full of flowers. But then when you get married and you see the reality, you start to see that all of those blooming flowers are now wilting flowers and dying flowers. And what the relationship psychologists say is that it's not actually a problem with your marriage, it was a problem with your vision, your expectation. Your expectation was that it was going to be this blooming garden of flowers. But how can you keep up with so many flowers? How can you make sure that each and every one of those are nurtured and growing? And so they said, rather, change your vision, even though you are married, even though those wilting flowers look like that's the reality. No, the reality is that this is your expectations and this is the reality. So change your expectations to be somewhat similar or even less than your reality, and then build your reality up towards that goal. And so what they said is, now envision instead one single flower, one single goal that you can work on in your marriage. In practical terms, like, oh, everything seems like it's going wrong. What's one single thing we can work on, that we can nurture? So then when that one single flower starts wilting, you have the ability, it's actually a tangible goal, to put some water, to give it some sun, and to allow it to grow and flourish, right? So it's really about our expectations and our visions of our marriage that need to change. It's not that our marriages are terrible. Our expectations that we've just grown up thinking have been very high. And so like I said, when it comes to practical terms, what does that mean? Taking one aspect of your marriage and saying, we're going to work on this for the next 2 weeks. Sitting with your spouse and saying, this is something we need to work on. And these are the practical steps we're going to take. And we're going to reassess in 2 weeks and see how that one thing has improved. Something as simple as, our time together that is quality time. Okay, yes, we do live together, we do see each other all the time, but how much of it is quality me and spouse time, and how much of it is just getting the work done, paying the bills, eating dinner, etc., right? You have to recognize what is that goal that you want to work towards. So that may be one goal. Another goal may be something as simple as, I want the relationship between you and my mother to improve, right? It can be, you have to assess what is it in your relationship that needs to be improved, and try to work on that one tangible goal. But both sides need to try to work towards that. And the goal needs to be tangible, and the tasks need to be written out, inshallah. And Sadia will talk about that more in the communication and conflict resolution talk that she'll be giving. But it's definitely, when you have expectations that are too high in any regard, you will always feel that something is not befitting and something is just not as good as it should be. But the reality is we need to change our expectations, and it's really sad, but if you come in with the lowest expectations, the reality is you will probably be happier in your marriage, right? And that's a terrible advice when I tell, it's good advice, but people think it's terrible when I tell that to engaged people. I say, have no expectations, but know your duties and your rights, yes, but have no expectations beyond that. And if you do, then inshallah, I think you will be happy, because hopefully your spouse will go beyond your expectations. Okay. With that in mind, with that foundation in mind, what are the duties and the responsibilities? So this is how Allah has framed our marriage, that what is our goal, what's going to be the difficulties, and how there is going to be this love. But you also need to have your minimal expectations, at least of the duties and responsibilities that Allah has ordained, or divine given duties and responsibilities. So the divine given duties and responsibilities that Allah has put forth for us are the following. And before I do that, yes, this is what we're going to do. I want you guys to try to figure those out. So if you have a sheet of paper and pen or your phone, I want you to, as the wife, write out what are the roles of the husband that you expect, and what are the roles of me as the wife. And then the husband separately is going to write out what do they expect is the roles of the husband and the wife, but separately. So I don't want you guys to discuss. After you've done this, then you can discuss. Okay? And if you're not here with your spouse, then still do it and compare your responses with them afterwards. So this is our expectations. Again, what are your expectations of my role versus their roles? My duties versus their duties. yeah, if you're not married, this is also helpful. So when I say roles, think roles, responsibilities, duties. You can think big picture, you can think in the home, you can think, it's whatever your perception of this question is. Okay. You guys need more time? You guys are very, very into this. You need more time? Okay. Take another 30 seconds and try to wrap up your roles and your spouse's roles that you expect. Okay. So what I would ideally do in this situation is then have you turn to your partner and see, did you guys have the same expectations? Did your husband expect the same things of his wife, or did the wife expect the same things of the husband and of themselves? But in the interest of time, I'll let you guys do that in the break. I do want to hear if anyone wants to share any particular ones. Maybe we'll come up with a list that essentially a lot of people have the same ideas. But if you want to share anything, please go ahead for the roles of the wife. If you don't want to share, that's fine. Okay. Yes?
Like the protection of the family, like the information, assets, things like that.
Privacy, protection of the privacy. Okay. And that's within the wife's roles. Okay. In your particular relationship. Okay, good. Yes?
Everything.
For?
Huh?
For whose responsibility?
Equal. Like everything on both sides.
So that's why you got done writing really quickly.
Real quick.
All right. Nice. Everything on both sides equal. So both have to work the same amount of hours. Both have to bear the same amount of children. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Pregnancy, weight gain, and there's husband pregnancy.
For
weight gain
sure,
too,
for
so,
sure. Phantom
both
pregnancy.
happen.
Okay, good. Okay, that's good. Anything else? Okay, so like I said, in the break time, I want you to go sit down with your spouse. That's why we have these nice break times in between. You're supposed to be able to take it in and absorb it and see how you can apply. Look at what you wrote down for yourself, and then look at what your husband wrote down. As the wife, look at what you wrote down versus what your husband wrote down for the wife, and see, okay, where did we agree, and where was that one point where that's what you expected of me? Or you expect that of yourself, I don't expect that of you. And discuss those particular points which you disagree upon. It's so important to write these out, because what is the majority of marital conflicts? Unsaid expectations. Expectations that you have up in here, but you haven't verbalized it. So I expect that my husband does X, Y, and Z. And when you say that to him, and you write it out, and you show him the list, now he finally knows, because maybe there was something on that list he'd never been doing this entire 2, 3, 20 years, but you've been expecting it the entire time. And the same vice versa for the wife. So it's so important to just lay these out and say them. And I like your approach, it's good, but it's also so good to be detailed, because there may be certain things which you expect that, oh no, but she should know that was something she would do and not me, right? So it's good to also write them out. But I mean, if that's how it's been going well, it's been going well. Alhamdulillah. So now let's look at it from the perspective of the raw bones fiqh. And why are we going to see that? Because a lot of times, like, every relationship is different. Every person's culture plays a part in how they discuss and decide how these roles are split apart, and every person's family history as well. And it can be that someone has a completely different culture or family history, which then equates to different expectations, which might result in conflict, right? But let's look at least the bare bones so that we know from the Islamic perspective, in Allah's eyes, in the perspective of the fiqh, what are the responsibilities of the husband and wife? Oh, okay, this is my okay. Here we go. So the husband's duties, the wife's duties, and the mutual rights of the couples, these are the bare bones of them. Number one, the husband's duties is provision for the family, taking care of the family financially. That is the obligation that Allah has put upon the husband. If the wife chooses to, she may work, but that money that she brings in is solely hers. So the husband's provisions take care of the entire family, and the wife's money that she brings into her own account can remain her own unless she voluntarily decides to pay for any family expenses. Number two, protection of the home. It's essentially expected that if an invader was to come into the home, if a robber was to come into the home, the first line of defense is the husband to protect his wife and his family. Okay? This is not to say that a woman shouldn't be trained and she shouldn't know how, self-defense and how to use a gun or whatever she needs to. That's good. But the responsibility lies on her husband in case, it's like, who's going to do this right now? It's the responsibility of the husband from the perspective of the fiqh. And then finally, and this one is so difficult to wrap our head around and understand all the different facets of it, is head of household. For the husband is in the hierarchical pyramid scheme that Allah has put from His wisdom, is that He's created a managerial system where at the end of the day, if a husband and wife are disagreeing on something and they can't come to a conclusion and there's just no way to get out of this situation or conflict without coming to a conclusion, then there's going to be someone who's going to have to say, I will have the final say. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His wisdom has given that to the males of the household. This has been taken for many generations, misconstrued to mean dictator and, servant, right? Not in any way at all. And how do we know that? Because of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, how he and his wives would disagree on certain things. But at the end of the day, they could disagree. One could bring their side, the other brings their side, bring their evidences, bring all of the points. But at the end of the day, if they cannot come to a conclusion, then the husband would have the final say. And you can see this in any type of situation where, a business, for example, or, a team. There's always got to be one leader so that the responsibility of making decisions falls back on that person. It is even mentioned, when you have three people, the Prophet ﷺ says, when you have three people, just anywhere, a group of three people going on a journey, having some sort of task, the Prophet ﷺ said, appoint one as the emir. So it is just this responsibility falls on this person. It doesn't mean that person doesn't take shura, doesn't ask everyone else their opinion, doesn't take their opinion into consideration. That is necessary, and that is part of the process of being an emir, and it's a part of the responsibility that person will be asked about. So this is actually a very, it's a situation where every single decision you're going to make is going to be asked about. And it's not that you can just take the decisions and say, I've got the ayah, I'm head of household, I am the president of this, whatever it may be. If you take it to the level where you are doing dhulm or oppression upon another, all of that is taken into account. All of that is going to be added to our bad deeds on the Day of Judgment. The Prophet ﷺ said that one of the types of people who are going to be shaded on the day when there is no shade is a just ruler. And from amongst that, the scholars say it is the husband who is in charge of his family. And if he doesn't act justly in that position, then that's going to be against him and not for him on the day of judgment. So it's actually a scary responsibility to have. Okay. Finally, secondly, in the wife's duties.
Sorry.
Yes.
Question before we go low. In terms of head of household, they can't come to decision. You know, there's research, the khara, shura. So the husband is taking over in preference. He can still, of course, still defer that to his wife. Her decision go with that. But being his head of household, he also still takes on the burden, the consequences of that decision, accountable in front of Allah, even in the dunya as well. Okay. So now I'm just internalizing to make sure I got everything.
Sure. So I think that's a very good point. One is that the decision making can be deferred to the wife in certain situations. Why do you think the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were disagreeing in some regards? It was that maybe something that was really particular to them that they felt strongly about, that I need to be the decision maker here, and they disagreed. At the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ sometimes agreed with them, sometimes made his own decision. So in certain regards, they had the final say. In certain regards, he had the final say. But it was up to him to give that, with that structure, he was the one who was able to make the, figure out how are we going to get to the solution in this decision-making process. There are so many things which some spouses defer over to one spouse or the other based on their abilities and their skills. So in some families, the wife takes care of all of the finances, pays all the bills, makes the budget, everything. This doesn't contradict with that at all, because they've agreed together that that is her responsibility, and they've agreed together that this is his responsibility. Again, this comes down to the point where husband and wife are disagreeing on some issue and can't come to any conclusion. They've sought other people's help. They've sought help within their family, and now they can't make a decision. Are we just going to sit on a gridlock and not make a decision? No, we will defer this to the husband. The wife's duties, honor and respect of the husband's decision, it just goes hand in hand with the ayah, is that she's going to honor that decision that he makes in that particular case, and in other decisions they can always discuss together and come to a conclusion together. And then finally, in the wife's duties is the shepherd of the home. The Prophet ﷺ said that the woman is the shepherd of her home, meaning she is going to decide how things are going to be done in the home. This is kind of like her territory. Does this mean that the responsibilities of the home falls all on her shoulder alone? Actually, in fact, it is mentioned in fiqh that it was the norm for people to have maids. Who was the one who decides what's the maid going to do and take care of in the home? That was the wife, because she's the one who has the responsibility over that. So this idea that it is Islamically obligated upon her to, like literally to go do the dishes, that's the Islamic obligation? No. The Islamic obligation is that this is taken care of. He's taking care of the provision outside of the home. She's taking care of what's happening inside of the home. If she delegates that to other people, excellent. If she delegates that to her husband, excellent. And they agree upon those things, right? So it's that she has the ri'aya, the head of household, the head in terms of what's going on inside the home, particularly in the domestic things. She can decide to, and what happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ is they had people helping them. They had other family members. They lived in extended family homes. So, for example, if someone had a child and a woman needed to go out and tend to the farm that she and her husband are working on, so the children are left with the grandchildren. So it's kind of, we need to get away from this idea where full sole responsibility falls only on the wife for certain things in the home. No, this is her responsibility to delegate if she pleases, and it is the responsibility of the husband to find a way to make that delegation possible if it's something that she desires, because again, they're a team, they're working together, and these things need to get done. So I think that's something, and there's even a quote in the someone recently put this up on Facebook, but in the Maliki fiqh, it mentions particularly that, or a particular scholar says, it is mentioned that a husband must mention to his wife that these, like the taking care of the dishes and this and that, is not actually her personal responsibility, but hers to delegate and for them to negotiate and for them to come to a conclusion. Okay, and then finally the mutual rights of both. Number one, absolutely no abuse, whether that's physical, emotional, or financial. And each of these come in different ahadith. Physical abuse, for sure, the Prophet ﷺ says, La darara wa la dirar. There is no harm and there is no reciprocation of harm. And so the ayah about the hitting of the wife, we can get into that in great detail. I don't know if we have time. We can get in it if someone wants to talk in the break. But you have to understand the entire context of that ayah and how it played out, how the Prophet ﷺ talked about it and warned them against it when people were overstepping their bounds. As for anything that's actually harmful, any physical abuse that actually harms the person, absolutely not allowed. Emotional abuse was not allowed. The Prophet ﷺ, a woman comes to the Prophet ﷺ complaining that her husband has said something terrible to her, not touched her in a terrible way, has said something terrible. Ayat are sent down in Surah Mujadila where Allah says, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. That Allah has heard the speech of the woman who is arguing with you about what her husband has said. And the conclusion was that her husband had to pay a kafara for the terrible words he had said. He had said to his wife, "You are like my mother. You are like the back of my mother." This is considered, like in common terms, that he is verbally abusing her. He's saying nasty, dirty things to her. That's terrible. It's basically saying, like, I think of you like I think of my mother. So saying to her, I don't want anything to do with you. And so she comes complaining to the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah hears the speech of that woman, which was an indication to the men of the time that you may say things in your home and think that it is private. Yes, it's private, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears everything. Allah hears everything, and everything is being taken into account. So it was a warning to the people that, this is not going to play out very well for you. Even though you feel like you're behind closed walls and closed doors, you're saying these things, Allah hears it, and it's going on your scales. And financial abuse, a woman comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, my husband is being stingy. He's not spending on me or my children. And the Prophet ﷺ says, khudh, take from his wealth what is necessary for you to use. Because essentially, it is your wealth. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, your husband's wealth is for you and your children. He's being stingy, not letting you buy what you need to buy in terms of food, shelter, clothing for the children. Then take, because it is essentially like your wealth. So essentially he's saying you're not allowed to financially abuse someone. You're not allowed to hold them on a string with this amount of money and make things difficult for them for that reason, for the reason of making things difficult, right? If times are hard and you have budgets, of course, that's something that needs to be negotiated between head of household and shepherd of home coming to a conclusion. But if it is for the reason of hurting and harming that person, then that will be something that we will be accountable for on the Day of Judgment. Number 2, sexual intimacy, and we're going to talk about that in great detail in one of the talks. But that is a right and responsibility upon both spouses. In great detail, we'll go into more about each of those. But it's actually, there's a hadith mentioned where the Prophet ﷺ talks about the husband's right, and in another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ talks about the wife's right. And so it is a right upon both of them. How to be kind and tactful about it is what we'll talk about in the other session. And then finally, kindness, ma'ruf. Ma'ruf is mentioned so many times in the ayat relating to husband and wife. It means the good that is known to be good. That is what you have to give and be giving and receiving, hopefully, inshallah, between husband and wife. And so as all of these responsibilities are held up, each of them need to be done with kindness, even to the point that Allah says, when you are divorcing, also do it bil ma'ruf. When you are going to divorce your wife, when a husband and wife are going to split, Allah says, make sure you do it with kindness. And if only we listen to the suggestions of our Lord about how we should do things, it would make lots of divorces a lot easier. That if you are done with this relationship, then part in a good and kind way, so that there is not this extreme hostility and animosity. But of course, if one side is being good and the other is, hateful and angry, it's obviously difficult. But the best thing is still to try to be kind. even in these difficult situations. But it's just beautiful that we have this throughout our marriage that is essentially put in the Quran. Allah says, deal with your spouses bil ma'ruf, and even if it comes to divorce, deal with them bil ma'ruf. If you're going to divorce her, then divorce her and make it obvious and make it set and let her go, and don't keep pulling them back, which is why even the divorce laws are particular. Allah says that at-talaqu marratan, 2 times you're allowed to take her back, and then you're not allowed to play anymore. You're not allowed to be playing this game of, I'm married to you, no I don't want you. I'm married to you, no I don't want you. The 3rd time you say that, goodbye. That is it. It is Islamic Shari'i divorce, because you cannot play emotionally, you can't play with someone's emotions in that regard. Okay, and so we have just a few minutes left, and we will, inshallah, take some questions. And if there's no questions, then I'd encourage you guys to do the activity with your spouse right now. But if you have any questions, please do. Got a little shorter on time on this session, but yes.
So I'm just trying to remember. I guess growing up, I understand that the man's the head of the household and he has a final say, because at the end of the day, he, he's held accountable. He has to blame for bad and take it for good. With all this, I guess my question is then, do the couple share in terms of accountability, or does that fall on the man? Because the whole common, at least growing up, the whole common conception is that he has final say, because if anything is wrong, he has to be blamed. You know what I'm saying? But I think that misunderstanding is wrong when we Islam. You know what I mean?
Sure, I think that's definitely, half of that is correct. He has the responsibility, and the decisions that are made do fall on him. But if this decision is made, say for example, a husband and wife come to a conclusion together that this is best for our family, and it ends up being that this was a decision that is outside of the Shari'i decisions of what, it's outside of the guidelines that Allah has put forth, then they would both incur that responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah. If, for example, a husband puts down a rule that is not within Shari'i guidelines, and the wife disagrees with it but cannot budge him, and that has to be the rule that is set in the family, then the responsibility does not fall on her shoulders, because it's not something that she had agreed to do, right?
Is that working opposite? If he defers to her, it's going to be wrong, then they
So
both
if
take
he
blame,
defers to her, this is kind of where it gets
That was my question.
kind of, because the man is the head of household and he has to make the final decision, if he defers to her and she makes a decision that is out of the Shari'i guidelines, it is his position then to say, we're not going to do that. And if he agrees with her decision, then now they have mutual responsibility.
Okay.
So in a sense, he is more responsible at the end of the day.
No, I get it, because he deferred.
If he is deferred to, he's responsible. If she is deferred to, he is responsible, because he is the one who's supposed to oversee this.
Either way, you can't really blame her and stuff.
Right. Just the same way as, like I said, the director and the co-director. If a co-director makes a decision that is not right, and the director was supposed to oversee that decision, and it ends up, plummeting the business into failure, the director also holds some blame for not being able to make a decision to stop that from happening. Whereas if the director makes a decision the co-director cannot change, then that co-director is essentially, at least from the fiqh perspective, is not responsible. And I think, what is the time exactly?
It is 12:30 exact.
Okay. So we don't have much. I think we're going to start the next session. The way they're looking is like they ended a while ago. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free. I mean, we're here all day. If you guys are here all day, you can come up to me afterwards. But we will end here. Definitely discuss with your spouse and inshallah come to some conclusions of what you believe are the duties. If it's beyond this scope, by the way, that is something that's totally negotiable. If it's beyond the scope, not within these bare bones, that's where it's totally negotiable for spouses to decide who and what does what, and whether it's the spouses themselves or delegated to others. Yes?
I think it's inherent, but is taqwa a duty and responsibility for it?
Is taqwa a duty and responsibility for the marriage? It's not necessary. It's obviously encouraged. This would go under the tahsiniyat. It would beautify the relationship to make sure that the other has the spiritual taqwa that you would want to see in yourself or you'd want to see for your family. but it's also something that can't be forced, right? You know, spirituality cannot be forced, so it can be definitely encouraged. Same way for your children, your responsibility is to give them, have them have this sense of taqwa. But if they were to veer off after they've hit puberty and they're making their own decisions and they were to veer off, it's still a responsibility to encourage, but the law says that their sins don't fall on the parents. Once they've hit their own age of liability, their sins would not fall on the parents. So long as the parents have said to them, I disagree with this and this is not good and I would like for you to have done something else. A parent is still, nobody gets the burden of another person on the day of judgment in terms of their own particular sin. I mean, even in terms of the husband and wife, it is mentioned in a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Do not be what's called I don't know what the word is in English. It's cuckold, but it's essentially that basically the wording is that your wife is doing things outside of the home that is not respectful and not respectable. It's still a responsibility of the husband to have talked to her about it. He can't force necessarily her to change, but to have spoken to her and given her guidance, essentially, it's his responsibility to do that, and not just what is defined as a cuckold is just be free and let her do whatever he wants, or your children, right? You have to encourage and you have to give them the guidelines, and then لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. Then on the day of judgment, no one carries the burden of another person's sins at the end of the day. So of course, the encouragement to taqwa, but no force is possible. Essentially, we know it's not possible to force.
When it comes to raising kids and like giving them time or like setting rules for how you want them to be raised, then whose responsibility is like?
That's, since it's not, so you could say it comes under the shepherd of the home, meaning the woman can have a great say in this in terms of coming to the conclusions of what they want to come to. But all of it still has to be negotiated and spoken with both husband and wife.
And like in terms of giving the children time,
Mm-hmm.
so is it like half and half, or is it like?
Like I said, what's not sitting here is completely up to the couples to come to their conclusion. So in their relationship, 50-50 works, good. That's what works, and that's fine. As long as these other duties and responsibilities are being upheld, essentially. Where you can't, like this is an example of going against this, is saying, as the wife, you have to provide, and as the husband, I will not provide. Forcing this other role upon the other person that is not a part of their duties and responsibilities. But where we can negotiate is, I will provide, and you want to work, you will provide, and this is how we'll split up the finances. No problem. It's that as long as these are all being met, then anything else is up to negotiation. I mean, even to the point where, and this is kind of interesting, the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and even at his own birth, and then even in the time of Mecca and Medina, in the time of Mecca and Medina, and the time of the Prophet ﷺ's life, people were sending their children off for 2 years in the first few years of their life to the desert with the people who had the untainted Arabic, and also who had a better health situation in that part of the city. So for 2 years, the children's responsibility was bore by somebody else, and that was okay if the husband and wife were okay with that. Yeah. So it's kind of, it's very different from what we expect is the responsibility. Not saying to just send your children off to boarding school at the age of 0 to 2, no. But if that conclusion has come, say, later on in their life, it's still okay. And to not shame the family to say that you've done something un-Islamic, you've sent your children off. No, if that's good for their education, and it's definitely something they've made, gotten shura from others that this is a good decision. Sometimes it's necessary to be made. But yeah, all of that is up to negotiation between husband and wife, and I think time is definitely over. And we will, inshallah, go to our next session, which is?
So inshallah, the next session will be by Imam Mahad. So it's going to start at 12:40, which is in about 4 minutes. So I mean, you guys can just relax, stretch for about 4 minutes, and then he'll make his way down here. Yes.
Is there a way you can turn the thing off where you don't have to keep on?
Yeah, we have a stopper.
You can just leave the door open, I think.
There we go.
conference.
Let me go sit down.
I'm trying to say that.
I don't know. You wanna go to a
I wasn't in here. I didn't even.
And for lunch, inshallah, the waffle station food truck is outside, inshallah. So we will stop for lunch after this session. But they have fried chicken, I think fries, and they have all dessert like items as well.
Try
So
it.
inshallah, we're gonna
pick
stop
up
for
the
lunch
iPad real quick?
after this session.
And then just pull this table a bit back.
So take that pad off, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
They are all on our.
Oh wait, hold on.
Okay, just turn me all the way. Yep. Turn me some more.
Turn the chair, the table.
Turn me back a bit more.
No,
You can get out of here. You can get out of this place. Yeah, pull me back. Now you guys can pull this back.
Sorry, wait.
There we go. This is a dire ordeal.
Is this on your wheelchair?
No,
Just watch out for that laptop. Looks like metal just popped out. That metal just popped out.
and now if you can reset the.
It just popped out. It popped came out this way.
I just pick it up.
Sorry.
Maybe use a different table or something.
I mean,
Oh, what happened to the
Table
table?
sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. Just wait over because they're trying to fix the table too. Maybe we just remove this
I mean, I
table.
could if we lay it flat and then do it quickly. I can fix it real quick.
Let's just take this table out.
Lay it flat for like 2 seconds.
So Asha, if you can get that table. It's all good. Technical difficulties. Yeah, you guys can pick it up.
Are we just?
Just watch this
And then
stuff.
fold it and everything. Although it doesn't come out.
You can just remove the table.
Grab both the little.
You can turn it and fold it.
And then put we put it on the wheel.
What on earth happened to that thing?
I have no idea. I mean, I have. Yeah, exactly. Like that. I'll just put it.
Like,
Like 5.
This way.
that's fine.
Doesn't want to go.
Okay, we get it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No,
So it's going really good.
doesn't want to go.
It's a little okay. Cool. Really good. Oh, for this session,
They're actually starting out to go.
okay, that's fine. Minority report of
That's all good.
Or if you say,
Yeah, never mind.
Actually, if you could grab that, grab it, you come forward. Because I'm going to be going to the details stuff that I want to you can get the other stuff you do. Because I want to get at the end of it, yeah. So we have time to set up, I just need it at the end.
Yeah, the last.
Yeah, so right now, make sure the live stream is sent out again.
No, it's just visual.
No, you got it.
The setup. They have like a water bottle.
I know.
No, like I'll probably need maybe 20, 30 minutes to get
Okay,
back.
but, okay, you know your time, right?
Yeah, we're finishing at
How
1:35.
he had it set up. He had some like magical setup.
But you have to
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
at
First was this first. This first. Yeah.
This.
Okay, I think I'm gonna cover everything.
Oh, yeah. 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll do that.
You have to make sure, yeah, you know to stop him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he doesn't stop.
Yeah, I know.
You have to literally put tape on it. No, but 1:35 we're gonna stop for. I want you to look at the shot, make sure my entire
I hate when stuff.
body.
No, there's only 50 minutes for the whole session.
Yeah,
You're perfect. You're like right in the
So
frame.
you probably have to stop at 25.
okay, I'll do that. Can you just check the shot, make sure it's getting everything?
And it's still live streaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, let's go. Ready to go, Sean?
You want me to introduce it to them?
That's fine. You just start the session. Just say what the session is and we'll go into it.
Well, I don't think they've done. Oh, your introduction was already done.
Okay, so this next session is going to be by Imam Mahad, obviously, and it is called Marital Intimacy and Love Languages. So we'll jump right into it since we're cutting short on time.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I welcome you all to this session about marital intimacy. Again, this is a topic, that it's not very much discussed between spouses. Don't even discuss intimacy sometimes, let alone having this discussion with your parents before getting married, right? This is not something that we, in our cultures and different cultures, even like to discuss. And this is not just a Muslim thing. We know that, what is it called over here in this culture? In the U.S., it's called the what discussion? The birds and bees. So what do they say? Oh man, I had to talk with my son or with my daughter about the birds and the bees. I had the singular talk, that one talk that was supposed to suffice them about all of intimacy and about men and women one time, and I ripped that Band-Aid off, and it was so tough, right? That's what we think. And even in the American culture, in the Western culture, you don't really talk about that with your parents. I, as an imam, have conducted so many nikahs, and my policy is I do not get someone married unless they go through premarital training, either with myself or with my wife or through some kind of institution where they have gone through basic things. Why is that? Because we already shared the numbers. The divorce rate is at 1/3. There is a responsibility of keeping that marriage strong on the parent side, obviously the majority is the actual couple themselves, but also religious leadership. We cannot be going into the masjid and showing up, and the imam is saying, what is your name? What is your name? Got it. Never see you again. Good luck. What happened to them? Where did they go? What's going on? And maybe of those three, someone might argue, well, the imam has the least duty to them. Well, maybe, but Islamically, we should try our best. The most duty is obviously the husband and wife, but also one of the biggest portions is the tarbiyah and the upbringing of the child themselves. How many times have we had men and women, grown men and women, going into relationships, and in those relationships, what ends up happening? That the man or woman, so-called man or woman, is like a child. They don't know how to cook for themselves, clean for themselves, they don't know how to think for themselves. Every single thing is mom, dad, or my mom used to do this, you're going to do this for me, right? Every single thing becomes, you are not a person that can take care of yourself, let alone even be in a functional relationship, right? And that might be because the parents had spoiled the kids, or because of cultural backgrounds, and they'll say that no, the men aren't supposed to do anything, right? Women do the service, and men don't do that. The Prophet of Allah, if you look at how Aisha radiallahu anha describes him over 1400 years ago, we wouldn't even be able to imagine. We wouldn't even be able to imagine it. She says that كَانَ يَكُونُ فِي مِهْنَةِ أَهْلِهِ. And so for those who know Arabic, that means he was always, constantly, in the mihna, anyone know? In the service of his family. You all today, 2019, men and women, when I say the word service, and you think about a relationship, husband and wife, who do you think of? Who is serving who? Man or woman? Just be honest with yourself. What do you guys think? Who's the one doing the serving? Is it usually the man or the woman?
Woman.
The woman, right? But someone might say, no, my husband serves me time to time. That's good, that's wonderful, mashallah. But overall, and especially if we look at different cultures, wallahi, I promise by Allah, I had individuals come in and speak to me time and time again, because of their cultural backgrounds, they will say that the mother and the father will have the girls working in the kitchen, and the boy, listen to this, wants to make food for himself. He wants to make food for himself. And he's being told, get out the kitchen. You come over here and you make food for him. And the sister's coming over there to make food for him. Or he wants to do something and his mom shoos him out and said, this is not your place. Culturally, if we teach that, what are we going to end up with? That when you have a husband now living in the house who's like, sandwich. Where did that come from? Where did this sandwich business come from? Because that was the training you gave him, right? Doesn't know any better. So this training is important. But anyways, that's a little bit of an intro, but we want to get to, what about the discussion about intimacy, right? Intimacy is the main point over here. This is a discussion, intimacy is something we also need to have with our children. And you're like, excuse me? Have discussions of intimacy with my children? I would rather take this arm and toss it out than have a conversation. I'm not saying you tell them this is what pleasure is and what that is. No. You're misunderstanding me. This is called sexual education, right? When it comes to intimacy, that's a talk for adults, right? But when it comes to sexual education, that has to be done. And I'll tell you why. This is so very, very important. Sexual education and knowing your body and how to protect yourself is key as an individual. You know why? Because the statistics show that 70% of people that get molested, or 70% of the molestations and 70% of the sexual assaults that happen from close family members and relatives and people around you. People around you. Why is it happening? It's because we are not educating our youth. We are not educating them. How many young boys and girls have been taken advantage of by their siblings or unknowingly, right? Could be unknowingly, or it could be by malicious intent. Could be by doing something very, they know what they're doing. Could be someone young, could be somebody old. Could be a friend, could be at a sleepover, right? Could be any of these things, could be at school. So we have to, first and foremost, when it comes to sexual education, intimacy, these talks, we have to start at the very ground level. We have to go back and having very, very important conversations. That we have to have these conversations. And we'll talk about how that's really done. So, looking at the, could you go ahead and mess with this again and take it down one more, and we'll knock out this one, inshallah. Take it downwards. Now, when it comes to children who have been either molested or sexually abused, think about this. When it comes to their intimacy, right? When they become adults and they're intimate with their spouses, do you think it would play a role in how they view intimacy? Yes or no? It would. Imagine if a grown man or a grown woman forced themselves upon you and you were a child, and now your husband wants to be intimate or your wife wants to be intimate, and they're kind of like, I want to be intimate, and they're kind of, a bit more like, yeah, I really want to, they're trying to really push for it, right? What do you think would go through that person's mind? That's where we have to understand that there is a mental aspect, and there is a medical aspect, there's a psychological aspect that deals with intimacy here. And it plays there, and we might not even understand it. And I'll give you my example, and I'm not ashamed to mention it. My mother, on a regular basis, I feel like once a month would say, make sure you're never alone with an adult, and that person is kissing you or hugging you, any of that kind of stuff. Make sure that you're careful of who touches you. And she would say this on a monthly basis. I'm like, what is she talking about? Why is she talking about this? Lo and behold, so we're doing our master's now, right, in marriage and family counseling. We had a class called healthy sexuality, and we were talking about children who got abused and stuff. And as I'm studying, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I just remembered something. This didn't seem quite right. And it didn't seem very right if I was, as an adult, this didn't seem very right. But as a kid, I was like, whatever, I didn't tell anybody. I remember around, maybe I was 8, 9 years old, something like that. I was in Pakistan, I was visiting over there. And while I was there was a person that was working for the home. He was the driver, the gardener. He kind of did all these things, right? And he was very playful. He was a very nice man as far as I knew, right? And he one day basically called me into his room, and he says to me basically oh man, I miss my son so much, and I just want to hug you and kiss you and stuff, right? And he gives me one hug, and I give him a hug back. I'm like, oh, and I play with him all the time, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. I gave him one big hug, and then he gives me a kiss on the cheek, and I was like, no, stop. And then he keeps giving me more kisses on the cheek, and then I'm like, no. And I push off. And alhamdulillah, I didn't go any further. But imagine if he decided to close the door. Imagine if nobody else knows what's happening in there. Imagine if he's able to talk me into certain things, right? And it wasn't because, in my mind, I'm not thinking because, oh, my mom told me. In my mind, I'm thinking, I don't want this. First off, he had a big old bushy mustache. I was like, get off of me, man. What are you doing? Get off of me, right? That's the first thing. And what's so funny is, this is a person that actually this is a person who had very interesting features, but he's very distinct. I'll never forget this guy. But he had this big old bushy mustache, and he was kissing me. I'm like, no, I don't want to, right? And I was and I just laughed it off, and I'm like, no, I don't want to. And he's like, no. I felt even I remember he was getting more and more kind of, what do you call it, aggressive in the sense, he's like, no, I want you to stay here. And I was like, no, dude, I'm done. I was from America, right? I'm like, get out of here. I don't nobody's gonna come and hug me up and kiss me up against my will, right? If it's my aunt or uncle, it's like, okay, I'll take one or two. but a big old bushy mustache, like going left and right, like, get away from me, this is not happening. So I walked out. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell anybody. I was just like, that was weird. I don't want that ever to happen again, right? But alhamdulillah, Allah gave me that foresight. Imagine if it was a kid who's a bit softer, and he's just like, and he's, that boy or girl just falls into it. And especially looking at the stuff that's come out now, my God, with all these documentaries of kids and stuff, if you just hear like one of the famous ones that came out, they were being told, these kids who were being manipulated, right? And Allah knows best what the truth is, right? But they were being told that we do these acts to one another because we love each other. We love each other. And what's happening? A young child is being told to perform a sexual act on a grown man because that is how we show each other love. They have been brainwashed. They're young, they're naive. If we don't teach them about what their bodies are, people will take advantage of them. First and foremost, we have to protect our children. If you have young people in your life, you have to have that discussion. We're not going to get into it now. We did an entire series about this, and you guys can look that up and find it, about how to have this conversation. Every single person should be having this conversation with their nieces. If you were to say, I don't have any kids, you have cousins, you have nieces, you have nephews, you have young people in your life, you must have this conversation with them. And guess what? This is the hard part. It can't be a Band-Aid rip. It has to be something you're talking about on a regular basis. And the conversation gets a bit more intricate and detailed as they grow up. Why? Because they're exposed to more and more things. They're not watching Paw Patrol anymore. They're watching some, please don't let them watch Disney. They're watching some trash that's basically guys and girls all over each other. And once they kind of graduate from that, they're watching the next thing. Then they're going to the next thing. Then they're in middle school and high school, and they're seeing everything happen. And they're seeing everything right in front of their faces. And we're saying, we can't talk about it, because if we talk about it, they'll be exposed to it. Oh, really? Exposure is what you're afraid of. Exposure is the least of your concern. We have to do education now. This is not time for exposure fear. This is time for education. We have to do mass education for these people so they're not just walking around knowing this is sexuality and Islam says, shut your mouth. No, it doesn't. Our cultures might say that. But the Prophet of Allah never said shut anyone's mouth up. He respected those questions. He didn't shame anybody. And we're going to start with that. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first off, sexuality, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Good or bad? Real quick, just give me an answer. Good thing. Alhamdulillah. The good answer. Good answer. If we're on right, Price is Right, I'll be like, good answer, good answer. Very good. This was a question that was asked, not this question exactly, but we were asked in the 4th year of our degree by our Iraqi professor in his 70s in Arabic. He's like, is attraction to the opposite sex a good thing or a bad thing? And all of us Islamic studies students, 4th year, we're like, I don't know what to say. Right? Is he going to stump us? What is he going to say? And I'm going to ask you the question. Is attraction to the opposite gender a good thing or a bad thing? Yes or no? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? So it's a bit more black and white, right? It's like, it's a good thing. Even sexuality, it's both. Because if I said money, is it a good thing or a bad thing? It could be either, right? It really depends on how you utilize it, right? You have that wealth, and you can end up just spending it on just complete trash, or you can end up spending it in haram, or you could benefit yourself, benefit people around you. Same thing when it comes to, what was the example I gave? Wealth, and what else?
Sexuality, attraction.
Sexuality and attraction. Who put that attraction inside you in the first place? Allah put it there. Now, that desire for wealth, the desire for happiness, who put it there? Allah did. What you do with it, whose decision is that? That's ours. We decide, right? We decide how we use that sexuality. We decide how we use that wealth. We decide how we use this body and limbs, right? So when Allah talks about sexuality in the Quran, it's never in a negative light, actually. It's never in that, unless it's talking about, punishments for certain sexual crimes and stuff like that. But the default discussion is always in terms of, it's something that's been made good for you, halal for you. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن. Allah said that هن لباس لكم. Your wives are garments for you, talking to the men. And you, men, are garments for your wives. And when you hear that, you hear the metaphor, right? But the explicit is actually very clear, because the question they asked was, are we allowed, the companions asked the Prophet of Allah, are we allowed to be sexually intimate with our spouses in Ramadan in the night times? Because they know you couldn't do it in the daytime. And Allah says, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. So He gives analogy that you are their covers on top of one another, right? It's giving you the actual, the metaphor and the figurative, right? And you're allowed, and then He gives it explicit. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ رَفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. That it is permissible for you to be intimate with your spouse. So Allah, when He gives that analogy, He doesn't just answer the question. He gives this beautiful analogy that you are a garment for one another. You are this wrapping, this beautification, this honor, this protection for one another. How many things can you say about garments, right? Like, I could have showed up in PJs, right? And I wouldn't look as nice. I could have showed up in a suit as well. It would have looked a bit nicer, right? But obviously it's a bit hard to get in a suit with this kind of condition right now. But whatever you're wearing, it shows you distinction. When you see someone who comes in for a job interview, it's like, oh, this guy cares and this guy doesn't care, right? She looks like she's ready for it, and she looks like she just rolled out of bed, right? It gives you distinction, honor. So your spouses have been made as that. But that's referring to sexually as well as not sexually as well. So the default mentality when it comes to sexuality in Islam is not something in negativity, but rather what happens in our Pakistani, Indian, Arab, American, does not matter what culture it is, we put those taboos there. Hi, like, how did you say this? How did you even say this that statement? Why are you talking about sexuality? Don't talk about that. This is not something we talk about, right? This is something that's wrong. The Prophet of Allah, he literally told the companions that if you were to have sexual intercourse, be intimate with your spouse, it would be like giving sadaqah, giving charity. Just understand that. Giving charity. Imagine you drop $5 in the masjid donation box. You donated something. When you are intimate with your spouse, men with women, and women with men, you are giving charity. You are giving something of your... Think about it. What is charity? You give something of yourself to someone else. What a beautiful analogy. It's not just something of fulfilling your own needs. It's you're giving something of yourself to someone else so they can enjoy it. And that's a lesson for men and women. That when we talk about intimacy, it's not just one-sided. And the Prophet of Allah tells us this time and time again, that when men go and approach women, or when intimacy is supposed to happen, He said to them, do not approach them like animals. He said, la'ibha, meaning foreplay. And we'll talk about these things inshallah in more detail, but he explicitly says, make sure that both parties are enjoying it. This is not something that is just like, this is just for one side, right? And we'll talk about this inshallah in great detail, but let's go back to the hadith about the sadaqah, right? So the Prophet of Allah says that when you are intimate, it is like giving charity. And now the companions are like, this is charity, ya Rasulullah? How's that possible? Like, how can this be possible? He says, well, if it was the opposite case, right? If you were to have intercourse with someone who you're not married with, would you not be punished and have sin? And they said, yeah, of course. He said, that is then the reason why. Because if you do it outside the frames of marriage, haram, there's a punishment, there's sin. Versus if you do it in the frames of marriage, that's the way Allah has made it halal for you. He has made it permissible for you, for that. So, now, that's just the introduction in terms of how Allah and His Messenger frame the idea of sexuality. Now we're going to basically go into some, more explicit things, inshallah. And I've seen sessions on intimacy, and every single time I'm like, okay, it was good, but nobody knows anything you were talking about, because everything was like, and when you approach, and when you do this, and when you do that, and it's like, what are you saying? Nobody knows what you're saying, because the reality is, since we're so hyper afraid of certain terms, when someone says the terminology, for example, like oral sex, someone's like, what is oral sex? I have no idea what that is. Or like you start using anatomical terms, and people are like, I don't know what you're saying. And I'm going to be in like a sex education class or a Muslim sex ed class, but I have no idea what you're saying. So I'm going to be very upfront right now. We're going to be using certain words in the class that obviously you're probably not saying on a regular basis. But the whole purpose of education, the Prophet ﷺ said, there is no shyness in our religion. What I'm saying today is nothing that's haram. What I'm saying today is nothing that's vulgar or disgusting. It is for a purpose, right? This is not like some kind of like a film or like some kind of a rendition of a dirty scene where people are saying words. This is for the purpose of understanding what we can and cannot do, and what are certain sexual things that we can discuss Islamically, right? Where's the proof for this? The Prophet of Allah himself told you about sadaqah, right there. Not just that. A man came up to the Prophet of Allah and he said, we are practicing azm. The terminology for that in English is coitus interruptus. And you're like, what is coitus interruptus? If this was any other session in the world, people would say coitus interruptus and leave it at that, right? And you're like, okay, yes, coitus, they're practicing coitus interruptus. What is coitus interruptus? Let me explain it. It is the process of, the colloquial term is pulling out. What pulling out means is that when the man is about to ejaculate, before ejaculating, he will remove his penis and not basically release inside, right? So that means, obviously, it's kind of like contraception, right? And contraception, we're gonna define all these terms, guys. Contraception is trying to prevent a pregnancy from happening, right? Where you're just saying, we don't want to have a child right now, and we're gonna do that. So the companions went up to the last messenger of God, the one who gets revelation from God himself, from Angel Gabriel. He recites the Quran with his mouth. And the companions went up to him and asked him, can I pull out, basically? Is that okay? And the Prophet of Allah, do what? Get out of my... Did he be like, hey, Ali, Umar, Abu Bakr, Uthman, get him. Get this guy out of here. What did he do? Did he say, do you not understand who I am? I'm the Prophet of God. Do you dare come up to me and talk to me like this? You filthy Muslim, you filthy believer. That's what he did? How far away from what we imagine our Prophet's character is. How far away is he from that? What did he do? He said, that's fine. That's fine. No need to get awkward about it. Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. But to be honest, there is a difference of opinion, because in certain hadith he mentioned something a bit different, but the scholars are a bit kind of, that's why if you ever heard long time ago, maybe when y'all were getting married and searching up, can we use contraception, can we use condoms, can we use IUDs, can we use birth control pills, that's something else. There's no such thing as a drug control pill, that makes no sense. But they asked, and there was a little bit of difference. So let me give you the very simplified version of this. There's a difference of opinion, and if you want to practice contraception, as long as this contraception is not a permanent form of contraception, a vasectomy, or a tying of the tubes, or any version that's permanent, then that is okay Islamically, according to a lot of the scholars, alhamdulillah. So that can be done in different ways. Now, I'm going to give you, I'm not a medical doctor, but just from our basic research and our discussion with medical doctors, be very, very careful of what you take, because there have been lots of side effects related to birth control pills and hormone issues, and you do not want to be taking something that you have not researched properly. So look into things very, very thoroughly. And we'll talk about the actual act of intimacy itself, but this was just the birth control section. Any questions about birth control? You guys want to ask real quick? Everything seems pretty clear, right? There's a difference of opinion. It's perfectly fine to do it. The Prophet of Allah literally said in one of them, that's perfectly fine, and he allowed it, right? That's where the idea comes, that birth control is okay, as long as it's not a permanent removal of the ability to have a child. Any questions on that? Good, okay. Next now, besides birth control, we have the idea of, let's see, how much time do we have? Because I'm going to make sure I get everything. We have 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and then we'll do the Q&A. So first and foremost, as we talked about, removing that taboo and that stigma. How does that happen? We have to start that. We can't be kind of fiddling around with the kids and saying, okay, maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we won't. At a young age for kids, even when they're 2 or 3 years old, teach them about their private parts. Stop calling them funny names. Tell them, this is your private part, right? This is and call it a name that's not going to be goo goo gaga, like it has to be something very, very serious, right? This is your penis or your vagina. Because if someone was to touch that, if someone was to do something there, you're not going to be like, did someone touch your shame? And they're like, this is shame, this is shame, this is shame, everything is shame. When you show your arm this way, this is shame, right? No. Be explicit when they're there. Make sure you teach them who can take them to the restroom and who cannot. Even to wash their hands. Who can take them alone and who cannot. Parents and cousins and uncles and everybody, aunties, we all want to have the best intentions and the best thoughts about them, right? We don't want to suspect anybody. But I will, for the protection of my child, be overcautious, and I do not care what anybody says. I am not leaving my child at someone else's house, if I am not there, I am sorry. There is nothing happening at a sleepover unless my family is there and I know exactly where my child is sleeping. And I know they are safe. And I'm telling you, I used to go to sleepovers all the time. But now being a father, I'm like, I don't play that. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. Because a lot of times you ask, when did it happen? A cousin at a sleepover, an uncle at a sleepover. That's what happens. You have to be very real. Don't mess around anymore. We have to take our protection of our children very seriously.
At what age, sorry, do you recommend starting this out?
Well, it's up to the cognition of the child. How much is that child understanding? So even, for example, when you're changing a diaper and stuff, even talking to the child, right, at a young age, like we're changing your diaper now. Okay, we're gonna take out obviously it seems weird. Like, you're not gonna talk to a baby and be like, oh, I'm gonna clean your penis right now. Like, it's kind of weird to think about, but at the same time, there has to be a level where it has to start somewhere, right? If you just all of a sudden decide like, oh, now you're 5 years old, now you can start talking, like now you're talking properly and understanding, it's too late now. You have to make sure you're teaching from a young age. And those techniques, it really will vary, right? So you can say like, this is your private, this is your shame, like whatever you want to call it. But then when they get older and other people are watching that child and other people will be around them, they have to start being able to, when they start being able to communicate themselves, right? But even before they can communicate, they're listening and they're hearing and they're understanding and they're trying to figure out life, right? And when we say that, I'm going to go ahead and clean your bottom, again, you don't have to do it all the time. You're not going to like every single time you open the diaper, I'm opening your diaper now, I'm cleaning you up now, I'm just touching you just to the point. Like, you don't have to be excessive about it. What I'm saying is it has to be mentioned frequently. So they understand that, for example, if somebody was to come and if they started doing the same thing and it's not dad or mom, and someone starts taking their pants off and starts taking their diaper off, they're just like, oh, I know this. This is normal. Do you understand that? For them, there's nothing different about that. It's just somebody else is doing it. For us, if somebody started taking off our kids' diapers and started doing that, we breaking heads and slamming tables and chairs. It's like, who the heck do you think you are, right? Oh, I forgot to tell you. If I would have saw that dude doing what he did to me, to my son, at 8 or 9, oh my God. That boy wouldn't have a mustache at the end. I would have just yanked that. That mustache would be gone, first off. And this guy would have been out of the place. He would have, oof. Just what really boils my blood is not even that it happened to me, but me thinking that it could happen to my son, and someone would do that to my son, and if my son wasn't as willing to push away, what that could lead to, ooh, that makes me boil. That makes me boil. And whose fault would that be? Who's part of that contribution? Did I train him well enough? Did I teach him well enough? That's part of me as well. And my mom did a good job. It's just, you're young. Just remember, it's not that kids are dumb. Kids are naive, right? They don't see evil intent yet. They don't see ill intent yet. They see playfulness, kindness, goodness. They don't see the evil intent. We can see that like, oh, wait a minute. That's malicious. What is he trying to do? Someone says, hey, have a nice day. Someone says, hey, have a nice day. We know that's two different things, right? A kid might be like, have a nice day. But that intent is something we're not, and not to say that we know what everyone's intentions are. Obviously, Allah knows that, but we can read it much better than a child. That naivety that's there in a child is something that we have to look out for. They are young, they are innocent. That's what the example goes back to. We take off their pants, we take off their diaper, they think it's normal. Somebody else does it, they're like, yeah, this is normal. So teaching that at a young age. Actually, we're going to go ahead and skip all this portion and get to intimacy because I don't want to even, we're deviating from that. Okay, now this is a topic of self-pleasure itself, right? Or actually, before we get to self-pleasure, let's talk about what is Islamically allowed in sexuality and what is not. Obviously, anything outside the realms of a husband and a wife, a man and a woman, is not allowed Islamically. Does not matter what age, does not matter what genders, anything outside is not allowed Islamically. In terms of sexual intercourse, in terms of touch even, right? We don't touch the opposite gender in a sexual, playful way at all even, right? And that's something we just don't do. We know there's a sin for that. We keep our distance and our barrier. We keep a respect, a mutual kindness, an acquaintance, a level of even pleasantries where we say salam to one another. But we do not get to a realm where I am sitting with a woman by myself in a car and me and her just driving around by ourselves and she's not related to me, right? That's not going to happen. Unless there's, exceptional circumstances, like maybe there's like a medical situation or whatever it may be, right? Those are exceptions. But by default, we're not even allowed to touch the opposite gender in a sexual manner, okay? Now, when it comes to married folk, the main thing that we have to first avoid is when the woman is on her period, when she is menstruating, we know we're not allowed to sexually be intimate in terms of the man penetrating the vagina. But when it comes to other forms of sexuality, that's perfectly fine. The Prophet of Allah would actually place his head in the laps of his wives while they were menstruating. He wasn't just like, oh, I don't need you anymore, right? No, he would like put his head in his lap. He would kiss them, and even in those times, right? So there was still a level of intimacy that could be had, that it wasn't just all about the penetration. It was beyond that as well. Besides the menstruation, then you also have the act of anal intercourse, meaning that the man will insert his penis into the anus, the back of the woman, right? Not from the back, not the vagina, but I'm talking about the actual anus itself. That is where overwhelmingly it is considered haram that act is to happen. So you don't do that at all. So anal sex, off limits. Sexual activity, not sexual activity, but penetration during the menstrual cycle, also haram. And not just the menstrual cycle, it's also the nifas, which is the time when a woman is having her postpartum bleeding. That is basically like, after she has delivered a child, right? So that covers basically, you have two realms, right? You have the bleeding, and then you have the anal sex, right? These are the two things that are haram. Everything else either is completely allowed or there's a difference of opinion. Either completely allowed or difference of opinion. I try to simplify it as much as I can. What is something that is completely allowed? Having regular vaginal sex, right? Just going and penetrating through the vagina. There's no problem with that. From any position, right? Any position. Going from the front, going from the back. It does not matter what the position is. It's completely up to the individuals. They decide that. Now, the next thing we have is masturbation, right? The idea of stimulating the other person's sexual organ. That is completely allowed as well. There's no problems with that. There's no issue with that. Now, the next one is then oral stimulation. Now, that would be either the mouth of the man or the woman going on to the private part, the vagina or the penis of the man, right? Now, what is the ruling on that? This is where there's no clear Islamic text. And by default, when you study Islamic law, you learn that when there's no clear Islamic text, the default ruling in a situation that is not related to worship, it's not acts of worship, even though we talked about it's sadaqah, but it's not a purely act of worship. A pure act of worship is like prayer, fasting, doing hajj. This is not one of those. This is something that's a human interaction. When it comes to these things, by default, things are halal. How do we know? Allah says, Ayah in Baqarah, بعد أن نقول بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. He says that He is the one who created for you everything in this earth. لكم لفائدتكم, so you can benefit from it. So by default, things are halal until they become haram. That is the default. If you never studied fiqh before, fiqh is incredible. Usul fiqh is incredible. The default ruling of everything in this world that Allah has created is halal until it's permissible, until proven otherwise. Example, water, halal, trees, halal, pigs, halal until we were told you can't eat it. So when we say, man, everything's haram. No, everything's halal except what Allah restricted, right? Like every single drink is haram. Yeah, when you talk about alcohol, but like everything else, you got like 1,000,001 options, right? I got pomegranate juice. I got I got everything I want, everything under the sun. I can drink coconut water. I got what's it called, sugarcane juice. I got 101 options. You're saying, like the example I gave, why is this one thing haram? Okay, there's 1,000,001 other things that's halal. So by default, there's no ayah, there's nothing that explicitly says oral sex is wrong. Now what happens is, though, scholars will come and they will come and say, well, this act is something that is not very appropriate, right? And that's like, according to culture, like it depends on what you do. It depends on each individual couple will dictate what is appropriate for them and what is not appropriate, right? So I'm not even going to get into the arguments because it's too like scholarly and it's no need. There's a lot of other things that I wanted to get into. But the whole idea is those who say that it's not allowed, oral sex, they will say it's just it just doesn't seem like a good idea. But again, that's a scholarly opinion. If you want to take that, take it, no problem. But if you want to take the other opinion that's completely allowed, which it makes more sense because there's nothing explicitly prohibiting it, then take that opinion. Now, I talked about all those things. The most important thing to discuss over here is, even though I said vaginal sex is allowed, masturbation to one another is allowed, also oral sex is allowed, the number one thing when it comes to sexuality and healthy sexuality is consent and willingness of the spouse. It does not matter if it's halal and you force yourself upon your spouse. As soon as you've done that, it became haram anyways. You transgressed upon them anyways. Doesn't matter how halal it was. You said that, hey, we learned that oral sex is halal, now do it. Okay, you want to take that approach, good luck, right? That's not going to happen. As an adult man or woman, someone comes up to you and says, your boss, I need you to go do this right now, and they physically pull your hand, you will be like, excuse me? I'm a grown man. I'm a grown woman. No one forces me to do anything. Now we're not talking about work. In sexuality, imagine someone being like, this is happening. Okay, let's see how that works out for the next 2-3 weeks in your marriage, however long your marriage is going to last. Let's see how that works out. That's not going to work, buddy. That's not going to work for guys, girls. It's not going to work. You can't be forcing anybody to do anything. And this leads us to the hadith, right? What's the hadith? Because you're thinking it in your head, right? What is the man allowed to do? What happens to the woman if she doesn't come to the bed? The angels curse her. I got to go to this hadith. Oof, timing is running away. But I got to go to the hadith. It's very important. The hadith goes that if an individual is to, if a woman is to deny her husband in the bed, what would happen? That the angels would curse her throughout the entire night. The angels would curse her throughout the entire night. There are two understandings of the hadith. One of them is if the woman was to weaponize sex, meaning, oh, you're not going to do this? Well, I'm not going to do this then. And now she's weaponized it. Or, okay, I want you to go tell your mom this, or I want you to go and get me this. And then the guy says no. He's like, okay, then no sexual, we're not going to be intimate. If she's weaponized it, then she falls in this category. Where did this come from? Because the circumstances of the hadith, it doesn't just mention one thing. It mentions two other things as well. And all of them have to do with weaponizing or trying to legitimize something in a negative way. And it's not about the rejection of sex, but rather it is about weaponizing something in that meaning. And actually it is about a little bit about rejection of sex as well, obviously. But the other understanding is what you understand, that if you were to deny your husband who is looking for sexual intimacy, and you were to deny him, and you were perfectly capable, not if you had a headache and you were sick, and you were on very sick and you denied them, that's an excuse, that's legitimate. And hopefully the man should understand that as well. The man should know that as well. But if that is the case, that you had no reason to, and you denied him for sexual intercourse, then you would be cursed. Let's take this at everything we've seen so far. As a husband, talking to the men now, if a individual came up to your wife and started cursing her out in her face, even if it was your own mom, if it was like somebody from your own family, how would you feel? Anybody care to share? How would you feel? What would your reaction be? What do you think?
Yeah, immediate mode of protection.
Protection. Yeah. Your immediate reaction is, whoa. If it's a stranger, definitely protection. If it's mom or somebody from your family, it's like, let's get this to stop, right? But still protection at the same time, like it's still there, right? We're not talking about angels. We're not talking about human beings. We're talking about angels of God who don't commit sins, who do whatever Allah wants. You're saying that you know your wife's not going to be able to be sexually intimate with you. And you're going to say, I want to have sex, and we're going to do this. And she says no. I'm like, okay, let the angels curse you then. Let them curse you then. Do you see how that doesn't work mentally? If a man came up to your wife and started cursing her out, you'd be like, no, hey, get away from my wife. But now we're ready to say, yeah, because you didn't give me what I want, I'm going to go ahead and just let the angels curse you all night long, right? Like, do you understand how shaitan plays us? Do you understand how shaitan plays us? Where we're like, yeah, she deserves it. No, no. We have to really understand how we're doing this. So we have to be able to really see, look, if my wife's not going to be able to be intimate, okay, then there's other means. There's other things that we can figure out. What if, for example, if I'm asking for vaginal sex, right, and she says we're not able to do that, like because maybe she's just very tired. But guess what? What did we talk about before? Masturbation and oral sex, these are all halal ways to be able to do that. So we're like, all right, can we compromise at this at least, right? And what also might happen, guys, is that's why you guys need to come to the actual full training session. We go through this in detail. When we go through that, we talk about, look at why she's saying no. Is it because of the communication lapse that you have? Is it because you've been so emotionally constipated that she's been feeling that there's a distance between you and she's like, no, I don't want to? Well, if that's the case, then we have to work on that as well. Because that's not just killing your sex life, it's killing your marital life. And if we're not focusing on how to be able to communicate and how to be able to have a healthy relationship, forget about intimacy, it's not going to happen. And you're complaining about intimacy, but the root cause is not diagnosed. Too much medical terms for me in the past 2 weeks, man. But it's not diagnosed. You're like, but I want sex. Okay, but what about the primary cause? You can get sex now, but it's not going to keep on going. You're not fixing your relationship. You just had your immediate gratification, but your relationship going downhill more and more and more because you're not talking about the finances that need to be talked about. You're not talking about the things that need to be discussed. They have to be discussed. And I was going to go on a communication right now. I'm not going to even do it. Sophia's going to do communication. And actually, I don't know who's doing communication. Sadia, I think, doing communication. But anyways, so we've discussed that in general. You got the hadith. Now there's one other aspect. There's the other aspect of masturbation, not to the other, but self-masturbation. Again now, interesting enough, scholars are split on this one. And this one is more of a fight. Whereas oral sex, not much of a debate right there. Contraception, okay, there's a little bit of a debate. But with self-masturbation, there's a bit of more of a discussion. When it comes to clear Islamic texts that prohibit it, there's not clear Islamic texts that say you cannot sexually please yourself. But what there is present in the text is that those individuals who protect themselves are the ones who truly guard themselves in their chastity, are those who have intimacy, or the ayah is, those who protect themselves except with their wives, and a distinction of individuals that's not really there anymore. Like basically people that are like second wives, battle captives. It's something that's in a different time when it's not even something applicable anymore. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Like we're in that realm, we're not even talking about that scenario. So remove that out of the way. So it's just your wives. You can only be intimate with your wives. But we're not referring to sexual intimacy. We're referring to self-pleasure. Because intimacy and penetration is something different than self-gratification. But you can see where the scholars can make that distinction and be like, no, it's not. Because both of the things that it's mentioned has to do with a man and a woman for both situations, right? So one group will say, this is talking about actual penetration. Another group will say, no, this is talking about just ejaculation. It's like, well, where did you get that from? Where did you get the idea of actually getting to the point of ejaculation or orgasm being what this verse is talking about? So that's why there is a level of legitimacy for those who say self-masturbation is okay and self-masturbation is not okay. Now, when we talk about the idea of masturbation, right? Soon as you introduce the idea of pornography or watching anything or looking at anything haram, your argument, your side has failed. Done. Any kind of pornography, that's not halal. Looking at something that is not what you're not supposed to be looking at, sorry, it's not going to work. But to be able to take care of yourself and be able to do that, we have a precedence of this even from the companions and from the time when people would discuss this stuff in that time. So a young man comes to Ibn Abbas and he says that I'm a young guy, I fast, and sometimes I play with myself until basically I ejaculate. And he says, okay, that's okay, but what is better for you is if you get married and do that. He didn't say stop doing, because remember, he's a companion. He doesn't just hear something and be like, oh, that's just a little bit hot, I'm sorry. He didn't stop him. And he says, okay, it would be better for you if you did this. Why? Because even with masturbation and stuff, there's problems with sexuality in the long terms, right? You're not able to last as long, or you're able to be as intimate with somebody else. There's certain things with it as well. So he said it's better if you get married because marriage is the sunnah of the Prophet as well. Marriage is the sunnah. Do that. And again, that's why there's that difference as there of self-masturbation, right? Any questions about, actually, with this stuff, if we could get like some note cards and stuff, because I'm sure a lot of people don't want to ask that. If you can arrange for that real quick, Asha. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. There's, again, the more open you are, it's easier to get done, but I understand people want to write questions down. Go ahead and do that.
Are they specifying in terms of recreational or just as a last minute resort?
Very good, very good. So exactly, the man, how he says it is, sometimes I get like basically overwhelmed by it. So the goal is not like, okay, it's Tuesday, it's like, it's 5 p.m. now, time to go, like, take care of myself. But again, it's like you have to think about libido, right? Sorry, I threw a joke in there, but what I'm trying to say is that there's the idea of libido, right? Libido is a term that talks about the sexuality, how much sexual drive someone has. And usually men have a higher libido, usually. But that does not mean that there could be a marriage where the man's libido is much lower and the woman's is much higher. Now imagine a Muslim woman, wearing hijab or has been, praying all her life, now has to go and ask her husband, I need more sex. Do you think a woman, she's going to be able to do that? A guy, let alone, can't even do that sometimes, right? You can't even look at your wife and be like, I need more sex, right? Because we're not used to having even this discussion. That's why I'm telling you, when you guys come to our session, inshallah, communication is key. Because you have to be able to communicate about basic issues so you can go into the vulnerable issues. Because if we cannot be vulnerable in front of our husbands and wives, who on earth can we be vulnerable in front of? We weren't vulnerable in front of mom and dad. We didn't show them our weakness there. Not the coach, not the teacher, not our best friends. We didn't want to show them our weaknesses. And now we're saying, I can't be vulnerable in front of my own husband or my own wife. The Prophet of Allah broke down in tears in front of his wife. The Prophet of Allah, when he's asked, who's the most beloved person to you in front of a group of men? He said, Aisha, my wife. He was not somebody who was, oh no, I gotta be a rock. Being a man means being emotionally just restricted and making sure I can't, no, the Prophet of Allah, he explicitly says, if you love someone, what? What are you supposed to do? Tell them. Tell them. What a beautiful hadith. Spread the love. Don't be emotionally constipated. Spread the love. Spread the khair. Spread the goodness. Spread the goodness. Okay, so what was the other question? So basically, yes, the libido really is the one that determines this. This is not like a one-size-fits-all answer. Somebody could have a very, very high sexual drive. And they have to do it maybe every single day, or else they're going to resort to pornography, they're going to resort to whatever it is, where they have to do that. And usually that's when they're much younger, right? They have to resort to these things, right? And some kids are literally dying because they have this double life where they're going to the masjid, and then they're going home, and their parents have no idea. Nobody has any idea, but they have access to pornography. Everyone has access to it. You could pull it up in 2 seconds. And even if you're on Instagram, on whatever thing, you see some kind of actress or some kind of someone showing up there even when you don't want it. It's a hyper-sexualized society. And in that sex education series that we have, we talk about how do you talk to individuals, to kids, from like 0 all the way to 11, then how do you talk to teens about this hypersexualized society? Then we do this talk for the high schoolers and the college-age students and the ones who are married or about to get married. We have to go through the entire spectrum. We're not going to use this for the 0 to 11s, obviously. We're not going to talk about all the stuff that we talked about. But each age group, we have to engage them in the realm that they need to understand to function. Because education is empowerment. When we don't empower them, they don't know their rights. When we don't empower them, they don't know what they can and can't do. And they live these lives of just, I don't know what to do. I've had individuals, oh my goodness, you won't believe me. I've had individuals that have told me, I've been married 2 years and I have not consummated my marriage. I have not been intimate with my wife. Not just one person. I've had multiple people tell me this. Parents, what are we doing? Adults, what are we doing? What's going on? This is a marriage. You haven't consummated your marriage? And it could be, it's maybe not their fault. Maybe they have sexual dysfunctions and they don't even know it. That's where you have to say, look, when there's a problem, we have to get help. It might be a medical doctor who needs to check it out. It might be a sexual therapist, someone who did therapy training, a counselor, that focus on sexual therapy. When someone's going through sexual trauma from the past, someone touched me or abused me. If we just come into marriages and we haven't had the discussion with our spouse, hey, just, I want to be open with you, and maybe this is something you have a discussion after marriage, right? But if someone's open enough to have this conversation, I commend them. Have you ever had any sexual trauma? Honestly, I would kind of recommend it till after the marriage, just because that's usually the way Muslims kind of the circles go. But if you can do it, do it. Talking about sexual trauma, right? Like, have you ever had any kind of sexual trauma, any kind of past abuse or anything? Because that will play a part in how they view sex and sexuality.
Or just knowing that,
yes.
or just knowing, like,
It's
what
a reality.
is normal. No, I mean, yeah, so that, but then you just knowing what's normal. Like, did this happen? If that didn't happen, then that's not actual, like, consummation or something like that. Like, people not even knowing that.
But even beyond consummation, it's more so a negative stigma they have towards sex. So
Yeah.
they're not like, I'm a virgin. Yeah. They're not worried about that. They're more like I just don't like sex because something happened to me. That's the bigger thing, because now that's going to play a huge role in sexuality going forward. But also that point is there as well, because some people will blame themselves and be like, I was stupid. My uncle took advantage of me, and maybe I even told my mom, and they said, no, it's okay, we'll keep him away from you, and don't tell anybody, and just don't say anything. Hush, hush, hush. Right? What do we taught that person? That when someone transgresses, it's okay. And even, one thing I forgot to mention about transgression, about sexually forcing yourself upon somebody. That hadith is used sometimes. See, it says, my wife's going to get cursed if she doesn't be intimate with me. Thus, I can rape. There's no such thing as marital rape. I can force myself upon her. Where does that say that in the hadith? Do you even know Arabic? Do you even know English, first off? Because the English doesn't say that. And I'll tell you, the Arabic doesn't say that either. You just assume that, right? You assume that. And now, what we forget is the Prophet of Allah says, La darara wa la dirar. There is absolutely no harm, and there is no reciprocal harm. You cannot physically, you cannot sexually, you cannot transgress upon anybody, financially, any way possible. If you do, there is a repercussion for that. So when people come, and sadly to say, it's very sad to say, I've heard even scholars say, yeah, there's no such thing in marital rape. A husband can call for sex and he can force it. What are you reading? Give me your proof. Where are you coming with this from? Oh, the hadith. The hadith doesn't say that. You are just assuming that because it says that they will get cursed, you can say, now, we're going to have sex, and it's going to happen. I'm sorry. Islam did not allow husbands to be dictators. They allowed us to be the guardians and protectors. Qawwamoon. Not dictators, not authoritarians. The one who is there to be able to maintain and protect and be able to help out in leading the decisions, not deciding and doing everything, but helping in leading the decisions. And a leader takes into consideration and discusses and takes into point of view and is respected. If you're not a respected leader, then you're not the word that Allah used. You're not fulfilling that responsibility anyways. So don't say you are. May Allah help us. I'm saying you, but may Allah help all of us, because we have a lot of roles and responsibilities and duties to our spouses. We do. But fulfilling them is the hard part, right? I've talked about pornography, let's just get right to the actual sexual act itself. I want to just go and finish off with that, inshallah. It was 35. So let me go ahead and just get to the act. We'll finish with this as soon as possible. So, the actual act of intimacy, right, of penetration. We need to understand something very, very important, right? This is not the Islamic side. This is like the mechanic side. When we talk about the penis of the man, what is the equivalent of the penis of the man to the woman? Anyone know?
The clitoris?
The clitoris. The clitoris. Someone might say vagina. You'd be wrong. If you look at it anatomically, when a child is a fetus, right, before it's been defined as boy or girl, there's a little portion there that's kind of like, imagine like the clitoris basically, right? If it becomes a boy, Dr. Ahmad's here, mashallah, can you help us out? If it becomes a boy, what happens, Dr. Ahmad?
Not doctor.
Oh, yeah.
This is my brother.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Oh, Jawad's a doctor, my bad, dude. Okay, so what happens is that organ becomes a penis. But if the fetus remains a girl, it stays a clitoris. How does the man's penis work, and how does the woman's clitoris work? Very similar. They're very similar in functionality. The man's penis is actually a lot more sensitive, and where the sensation is, and the woman's clitoris is where the sensation is. But as us, we've only learned that, okay, sex and sexuality and pleasure comes from the vagina. But guess what? Surprise, surprise. 90% of women don't actually reach an orgasm through vaginal intercourse. Hear that again. 90% of women do not reach orgasm through just vaginal intercourse, meaning the man is putting the penis inside, and she doesn't reach orgasm. Majority of women reach orgasm through clitoral stimulation. And if you're hearing this word for the first time, I'm very sorry to tell you. That's a very, you're hearing, what I'm very sorry to tell you is your sex education teachers failed you. Everybody who's ever talked to you about intimacy failed you. Nobody ever talked to you about what intimacy is. Because what do? They told you gonorrhea, not jaundice, that's something else. Gonorrhea, chlamydia, AIDS. They taught you how the condom works. They taught you this. Because when we're in sex ed, they teach you mechanics, how it functions. When we're in if our parents ever talked about it, don't touch that girl, don't touch that boy. That's what they taught you. Nobody taught you what to do. Nobody taught you how to do it. And that's why sexual education is so key. How are we living sexual education? How are we living lives? First off, how are we going to vacations and restaurants and reading up the reviews and being like, this is the best dish to get? But when it comes to your intimacy, you're like, we'll just wing it. We'll just figure it out. You're just not going to figure it out. Go research. Go figure it out. Be able to enjoy it. The Prophet of Allah said that enjoy one another. It's charity. Well, if it doesn't even, it's not enjoyable, it's not going to be charity to you. It's going to be like, I really don't want to give this, right? But you can make it enjoyable. You can make it enjoyable by doing what? By learning about it. By actually figuring out what actually does. So what I want you guys to do is, be very careful now. Don't you dare type in these words and press images now, okay? Be careful. Type in clitoral orgasm, okay? Clitoral orgasm. And yes, I want you to YouTube it. Don't go anywhere else. Don't go anywhere else. Go YouTube it. And now what you're going to do is you're going to find a video that is not explicit in nature. You're going to find someone who is demonstrating it on a, what's it called? Like a figure or something, right? On a figure. And they'll show you how to actually do that. And that way you're not watching something, stuff for something haram and not watching dirty things, right? People might say, oh, let's watch, even Muslims might say, let's watch pornography together. It'll help us. No, it's haram. We're not going to do that. We're going to do something that's showing us how to do it in an educational manner. Yes, there will be certain vulgar words, right? And obviously, try not to get listening to those, but figure out how to do that. Clitoral orgasms. So 90% of women, again, cannot reach orgasm through the vagina. So learn what the clitoral orgasm is, because the chief complaint of women is what? We don't enjoy it. Chief complaint of men is we're not getting enough of it. I wonder how we could fix that. I wonder how you fix that. Maybe if she enjoyed it more, then they would want more of it, right? It's like you don't enjoy something, it's always going to be a pain in the butt to do. And when you're asking for it, it's like one party wants it, another one's like, okay, I'll give it to you. No, sexuality shouldn't be, I'll give it to you. It's, yes, I want to be intimate with you. It's something, and by the way, it's something that you can develop. Where you're able to, have times and vacations where we say, okay, we're going to just focus on me and you and romance and just taking care of one another, right? Okay, got some questions over here.
You need to eat lunch.
Yes, they're going to eat lunch. So we're going to go ahead and just break for that. You guys can feel free to ask these questions in the session. But let me just see. I think I might have answered some of these already. What about? Okay, with movies being made, like if you take a video of yourself or something and send it to your spouse, I would be very careful with that. You guys already know. The stuff is like, people have access to your phone and you can access it. I would not put anything on my phone or any device ever, because people could access that very, very easily. But if there was a way to ensure that it would only go to them, I still wouldn't do it, because anybody can get access to that. I would not do that. It's very dangerous. Even Skype and stuff, people can go into your accounts and stuff. Don't mess around with that. I wouldn't do it. This hadith about willing to have sex even on back of camel with permission for, I don't know what exhibitionism is. Anyone?
What's the word?
Exhibitionism.
Like bestiality?
Being naked. Public.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm not familiar with the hadith, so I'm not going to be able to comment on it. Can you please talk about second wife and first wife does not like him? Second marriages, how about you ask that question over there? I'll take this over there. If you can take this and put that in other questions. Besides that, I want to make sure, you know what, the time's up. I'm going to let y'all go. If you have any questions, I'm here for y'all, and we can answer questions. But is there anything I just really want to get off, be able to say?
When are we supposed to be back?
I got you. So the plan, inshallah, is right now we want to release you guys for some food, lunch. We have
prayer is actually going to be in 2 minutes, actually. So we're going to go ahead and pray right now. 63 minutes.
It's 1:45.
So make wudu and we'll go over there and you can get lunch, inshallah. We'll spread the time out so that you're not going to miss anything. We're going to make sure we get all the sessions. No one's getting their time off, inshallah.
There's a food truck on that corner of the masjid. So the other exit, if you go take a right after this hallway, at the end, there's going to be some food trucks, I think. And then so you can get lunch there after Salah, inshallah. And then right after that, we're going to have another session that'll take place actually right after Salah. So I would just hurry up with the food.
Actually, just a slight bit of change of plans. If you guys want to get food, the food truck is actually out there right now.
Okay.
And inshallah
What about
at
prayer, though?
2
It's going
o'clock.
to be, it's 2 o'clock?
Yeah, Sister Sophia said 2 o'clock.
What, prayer or lunch?
For Dhuhr.
But I don't think they, unless, let me ask Sophia. Sophia, did they change prayer to 2?
I don't know what time
Prayer's 1:45. So we're praying the next 3 minutes, and then after prayer, they can get food, inshallah.
Okay.
Okay?
Is that good? Okay.
Okay.
Then we'll stick to
So-
that.
Then we come
Sorry
back to this
for
room?
confusion.
Yes.
It'll be lunch we'll have like a good 30-40 minutes for lunch and break.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna
Married
all
session.
go into the main room for the one panel.
Oh, yeah, the
which is
panel's
for
happening.
everybody.
So the panel.
And we'll finish off with one last here, and then a really fun marriage
Okay.
game. Get ready to volunteer. I need 3 sets of couples to volunteer.
For volunteer for the marriage game. inshallah.
couples. I
Okay,
need
so
that.
get yourself prepped.
Sophia? Sophia?
I'm still here.
I need to see your face. So I get to talk to you. I need to ask you about the live stream. Are we gonna? Could you let my wife in?
Close the live stream.
Close this one, right?
Yeah, close it
Okay.
and I'll redo it.
So for this live stream, we're gonna close it, inshallah, and we're gonna go ahead and just use the other one, and Sophia will send that link out in a few minutes, inshallah, or we'll send it out in a bit, right before the session. So if you just watch your time, we'll go ahead and send it, inshallah. Just keep up to date with that. Assalamu alaikum.